On November 13th, 2013, issue number 1 of Chris Dingus's Manifest Destiny with art by Matt Roberts dropped in stores, and years later, it's now surpassed issue number 25 and continues strong. The book, if you haven't read it, is a revisionist history of the Western expansion of Captain Meriwether Lewis and Second Lieutenant William Clark. The biggest difference between what you read in your history books in school and Dingus's accounts of Lewis and Clark's journey is that the comic's tale is one of historical fantasy, where the West is populated by a seemingly endless cacophony of monster kind. In honor of the series passing the 25th issue milestone, I wanted to break down the differences between what your schoolbook said and the first volume of the comics. So get your supplies ready, strap on your hiking boots, and consider this moment right here your full-out spoiler warning. Seriously, this book is amazing, and if you haven't read it, go to the link in the description, buy it, read it, and come back. The first volume of the comics takes place between May 23rd and around May 27th of 1804, and depicts the expedition traveling on river to find some kind of shelter at La Charette before continuing their westward journey. As a broad stroke, this first volume follows the real journey fairly accurately. Historically, the expedition began not long before then, as suggested by the book, on May 14th, 1804 at Captain River in Illinois. Clark led the men off in 3 boats, a 55-foot long keelboat and 2 pirogues of over 40 feet in length. One of them was painted red and the other painted white. While all 3 of those vessels can be seen depicted in the comic, the coloration does not match the historical accounts. The comic also keeps track of events and dates through Lewis's journal, but it's worth noting that various members of the crew actually kept journals, and that most of the information that we have about the time period actually comes from Clark's writing. From May 16th through May 20th, the expedition stayed situated in St. Charles, Missouri, which was a town of 450 people in 1803. Finally, on May 21st, Lewis rode overland from St. Louis to St. Charles and met up with Clark and the rest of the team. The expedition set out at 3 p.m. Now, I took to reading the journal of Clark and some of the other members of the expedition, and I can assure you that the biggest difference is that the exciting, adventurous, and thrilling account of these days in Manifest Destiny pales in comparison to how utterly mundane and boring reality actually is. While the comic's core Discovery is fighting tooth and nail to keep civility, battling Buffalo Tor, reaching abandoned outposts, losing men to zombie-creating plants, and otherwise embarking on an enthralling arch-filled mystery, the historical expedition, well... On May 23rd, they sailed and camped. They passed a community not portrayed in the comic book. This community, which apparently never formally constituted a town, was Boone's settlement in the vicinity of Matson, St. Charles County. The colony of Kentuckians was named after Daniel Boone, who came there in 1799 and received a grant of 1,000 arpents of land from the Spanish government. It is often said that Lewis and Clark visited with Boone, and a bunch of people came and waved them off as they sailed away, but only Private Joseph Whitehouse's journal makes a statement in any of the journals that Boone was actually in residence at this settlement at the time the party passed by. None of the journals, including Whitehouse's, indicates that they actually met him, which is odd since he already had the slightly exaggerated reputation of the man who first discovered Kentucky. So you'd think they would have noted it if, they met that guy. Perhaps Whitehouse's scribe elaborated unjustifiably on his information, but we'll never really know. On May 24th, literally nothing happened. No joke, some of the men's journals say, quote-unquote, nothing remarkable, end quote. Now, we come to May 25th. This day is actually a little bit exciting, not only because the Corps actually did something, but it's also the source of some of the prime differences that will affect the story of Manifest Destiny moving forward. It's unclear in the comic exactly when the team reaches La Charette, but it seems to be between May 25th and May 26th. The settlement is depicted as further inland from the water, inland enough at least to involve leaving their ships and running wildly from a Buffalo Tor attack. In reality, La Charette was smaller than it's depicted. It was on the water, and it was almost definitely not walled. The settlement only housed somewhere between 5 and 7 families, depending on whose journal you believe. La Charette on Charette Creek in Warren County was the westernmost European settlement in 1804 on the Missouri River. French and Indian settlers had come there before 1800, and a small Spanish fort, San Juan del Missouri, was established around 1796. From the fort came the alternative name of the place, St. John. Daniel Boone moved there from Boone's settlement sometime after 1804. He died and was buried there, but in 1845 his remains and those of his wife were moved to Kentucky. The village site near present-day Marthasville has been washed away by the river. In the comics, the expedition encounters a ghost town. A corpse reactivating plant has killed almost everyone in the settlement, and they meet Magdalene Boniface, Irene LeBrun, and Eloise Grenier. Mrs. Boniface becomes a very important character in the series, but unfortunately not in history because she just didn't exist, at least not on this journey. Meanwhile, unlike in the comics, Lewis and Clark found the small hamlet and everyone in it was alive. The primary person they met up with was some dude named Regis Loisel. Regis was apparently born in Montreal and came to St. Louis in about 1793. By 1796, he had formed a partnership which later became reorganized as the Missouri Company, and then a bunch of partnerships after that. But the main thing that's worth noting is after his meeting with Lewis and Clark, he carried to New Orleans a copy of his report on the Missouri River tribes, which he delivered to the Marquis of Casa Calvo, who was the former Spanish governor of Louisiana. That guy later forwarded it to Madrid with a recommendation that Regis be made into an Indian agent to secure the friendship of the tribes for Spain and forestall Lewis and Clark's work and America's ambitions in the West. Loisel, unfortunately, died later that year in October of 1804 in New Orleans at the age of 31. Finally, we come to the biggest difference of them all. In the comics, Lewis and Clark head to La Charrette in the first place to meet up with the now famous Sacagawea and her French-Canadian husband, Toussaint Charbonneau. This is the biggest change of all, because the pair of interpreters did not join the Corps on their journey until November 4th, 1804, up in now North Dakota, while building Fort Mandan and camping out throughout the winter. So while Sacagawea did save the Corps discovery in many ways, they were historically on their own against these plant zombies. The following day, May 26th, they set out in the rain, and on May 27th, they received 2 canoes loaded with beaver, elk, and deer skins, and some buffalo robes from the Omaha Nation. Other than the fact that the events that took place during the days chronicled in Volume 1 are definitely more exciting in the comic books than they were in real life, the other differences come in how each of the characters is depicted. Oh yeah, and I guess the fact that none of them died. But that's a long story on its own and one for another video. In the end, we hope that you enjoyed the true history of the expedition and the secret history of Manifest Destiny. Hopefully you're now geared up to see the comic make it all the way to the end of the expedition, so keep reading and like this video if you'd like to see us do an episode on the characters and on the next leg of their trip. Make sure to subscribe to Skybound and let us know in the comments if you caught anything we missed and what you think of this crazy world. If you're a Skybound insider, you got to see this a week early on Skybound.com. So make sure you sign up so you can do that too. See you next time!